everybody? Welcome in to another episode of the NFL Seekers podcast. Today, we're coming at you with our fantasy football quarterback rankings. We'll be talking about quarterbacks 20 to 11. So we got 10 quarterbacks to yap about today. Super excited for it. Super excited to get into the fantasy rankings. First of all, we're at that time of year. We're grinding the underdog drafts, starting out our rankings and getting into the dynasty drafts. It's really fun. Really excited about it. How are you, Josh?
I'm doing great. Fantasy season, I've always said it holds a special place in my heart, man. It's always a great fun, you start getting the boys and the GMs back. It starts getting toxic. It's fantastic. It's a fun time, and it's time to start getting into this stuff, man, because the draft is over and now it's fantasy.
Yep, and we'll get right into it. So definitely stay tuned to the NFL Seekers podcast really all off season because we're just gonna be churning out fantasy content, churning out the rankings, and yeah, super excited about it. We're putting in a lot of effort into these rankings. So let's just start it right off with our consensus QB 20. Full disclosure, we merged both of our personal rankings together and kind of averaged them out to a consensus NFL Seekers ranking. So our consensus NFL Seekers quarterback 20 for fantasy football as of right now is Deshaun Watson. He's my QB 20. He stores as QB 19, and he's going as a QB 22 on ADP. So I guess we're a little bit higher on him, and we will be drafting him. But I'll let you talk about him first because you're higher than me.
Surprisingly, because I don't really like Deshaun Watson, to be quite frank with you. Yeah, I know last year you were very high on Deshaun Watson. It kind of made me laugh because this is kind of seeing your rankings. It's a surprise. I obviously gave you my rankings. You combined them. Dan's the one putting in all the hard work and the efforts on the graphics. So give it up for Dan on the graphics. The graphics god puts in the hard work here. But yeah, I'm honestly very surprised. You know what, Deshaun Watson, I'll be quite honest with you, I don't like him. He has not had a good season since his Houston days. I mean, obviously it's been, riddled with injuries in Cleveland, but he's just not played a good brand of football. I thought Joe Flacco was a whole hell of a lot better quarterback than he was, and even better in fantasy for the Browns. But, Deshaun Watson, you're just kind of banking off of him kind of returning to form. I mean, 2020, Deshaun Watson threw for 4,800 yards and 33 touchdowns. So I'm hoping, here come 2024, we can kind of find, a little bit of that old Deshaun Watson. Because I mean, Deshaun Watson was electric, man. Deshaun Watson on the Houston Texans was honestly just an incredible quarterback from his running dynamic, and especially from a fantasy aspect. Running was huge. He was scoring rushing touchdowns. He was throwing touchdowns. He just really had a good chemistry, and it was just working. And then all of a sudden that lawsuit, he took a couple of years off from football, and he's just not returned to form yet. So obviously in the last two seasons with the suspension and injuries, he hasn't thrown over 2,000 yards or over 10 touchdowns. And so we're just kind of waiting to see. He's a guy that I'm considering taking a flyer on. But I'll definitely be looking to target quarterbacks earlier than Deshaun Watson. But if you get left in the back end of your fantasy draft, he's worth a flyer, because if he does, return to that 2017 to 2020 Deshaun Watson, then he's a special player.
So polarizing. He's impossible to rank. It kind of feels like you can't put him outside of your top 20. As you can see, I put him at 20, you put him at 19. It's really hard to put him outside of the top 20 because of the upside, because we both saw him in that electric Texans season, and it's hard to like hold off of that hope with how good this Browns roster is, with how good Flacco was. Like that's the path to success for Watson, is just throwing touchdowns. Njoku, Amari Cooper, they have Judy now, they have some studs. So that is the path to success. But the problem is he fell off a cliff, man. Last year, watching him just on the field, there wasn't one positive game, I would say, where I was impressed with Deshaun Watson. He just looked like a different quarterback. He looked scared out there. He looked just in his head ever since the whole court.
Massage scandal.
Yeah, the whole scandal. There you go. I was looking for the word scandal. That whole scandal just seems to be in his head, though, and he's a completely different quarterback. And when he's out there, he's just thinking way too much. And he has some good plays. Like he averaged
Thinking way too much
19.9.
about massages.
Yeah, maybe he's thinking way too much about something. He's thinking way too much about the cases or something. But he had 19.9 points per game, which isn't bad. He didn't play a lot of games, and he had the injury, so you could hold out some hope that the injury was really holding him down, and he could have some upside. So I think QB 20 is actually a pretty like good spot. We're a little bit higher on ADP, and it could work out with how good this team is, but he's like impossible to rank really.
Yeah, I mean, if we can just get pre-massage Watson, then you're looking good. I mean, that's what I'm banking on, baby. We need that pre-massage because after that massage happened, bro, it's just some changed, the dopamine levels or whatever. I don't know. They're not there. They're not balanced anymore. But, you know, it's hard. Deshaun Watson is just he's a tough character. You're just really banking on just him returning to form. And obviously it's been 4 years since we've seen it, but we know the talent's there. We got to see it first. And until then, he can't be in that top 15 quarterback range because he's just, he's got to prove it first. And that's kind of why he's he's more of a late round flyer. If you're in a, if you're already drafting late, say you're getting a Kirk Cousins, it doesn't hurt to just throw that dart at Deshaun Watson because, the upside is there.
Absolutely. Like I said, he does have the weapons, as we saw with Joe Flacco last year. This Browns team was really relevant and kind of league winning at the end of the year with this offense. So there is some potential with Deshaun Watson. He has to figure it out. A lot of it is mental. He definitely has to figure things out as a quarterback mentally because, he was just escaping pockets too. He was just playing scared, man. He really was. So with that, we'll move on to our QB 19, who surprisingly actually averaged less than Deshaun Watson last season. He averaged 19.3, but that is Trevor Lawrence of the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's my QB 18. Stores has him at QB 22, kind of dragging him back a little bit. And then his ADP is actually QB 16. So we will be a little bit lower on him, but I'll talk about Trevor first because I feel like I really like him. I'm really optimistic for Trevor. Even QB 18 on my list, it felt kind of criminal. I definitely could see him outperforming it. I really like what the Jaguars did. They kind of, did what the opposite of what the Chargers did this offseason. They really just pounded and attacked the passing game, and they really tried to get weapons for Trevor in the passing game because last year it just didn't click. They didn't have chemistry and didn't really work out. So I like what they did bringing in Brian Thomas, who I absolutely loved. Draft him, by the way, in fantasy. And, you get Gabe Davis, a deep threat. Devin Duvernay in there with Christian Kirk. I definitely like the options with Evan Ingram and Etienne as well. I think it's a pretty good passing game, and he could, be a cheaper to a type of option where you're just hoping that his weapons can get him a lot of touchdowns. So I think he's definitely going to outperform what he did last year, and I am pretty optimistic about Trevor. That ADP at 16, I feel like he's not actually going as the QB 16. He's kind of a name that people are fading right now. So, I feel high on him, but how do you feel about him?
I mean, I'll be honest, maybe I got burned a little bit for Trevor Lawrence last year, but that quarterback class of 2021, man, is just an overall struggle. But Trevor Lawrence, man, I mean, the stats last year, 4,000 in passing yards, which is good, 21 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. It's tough, man. He plays kind of I feel like he maybe tries to do too much. It's kind of reminded me a little bit of Josh Allen last year, playing a little bit of hero ball, just making boneheaded decisions. I mean, his running side, I mean, he's actually a very capable runner. I mean, last year he ran for 330 yards to go along with 2 touchdowns, but I just feel like there's so much meat left on the bone with Trevor Lawrence, and it doesn't seem to click yet. I don't know. I want to see that breakout. I want to see him be a better quarterback. And I want to see it from a fantasy aspect. I feel like last year in fantasy, he was just so underwhelming in so many games where we thought he would just be a superstar. I mean, I thought Trevor Lawrence had top 5 potential last year. And so it kind of, I am lower on him. I don't love Gabe Davis as a wide receiver. I do like Brian Thomas Jr. and I hope that brings more touchdowns. It wasn't all Trevor Lawrence's fault. There's a lot of drop touchdowns, a lot of touchdowns left on the bone. So, I mean, if we see a lot of those, drops turn into catches, then, it could be a whole different game for Trevor Lawrence. But, I'm a little underwhelmed by Trevor Lawrence. I'm a little bit disappointed in him as of the last few years. We just haven't seen great football from Trevor Lawrence, and I'm just not quite a believer or a buyer in yet. And I don't think Gabe Davis really changes your offense that much. Brian Thomas Jr., on the other hand, he could be intriguing. He could be exciting. That could really be a key piece for this offense. So it'll be interesting to see how they go forward. But I mean, him and Calvin Ridley were so disappointing last year, which, I mean, honestly, if you're telling me right now who would be a better wide receiver, over, veteran Calvin Ridley and Brian Thomas Jr., I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I don't feel like they really did upgrade that much of the receiving core. So maybe that's why I'm still a little lower. But I want to see more from this Jaguars offense. I mean, it's the offensive whole, it's the offensive whole. It's kind of dragging Trevor Lawrence down with it. But maybe they are due for some progression, some positivity in that offense. And, obviously I hope a lot of those drops turn into touchdowns. But right now, I am going to be lower on Trevor Lawrence, and I'm not really going to be drafting much of him. There's more quarterbacks that I'm a lot more excited about.
Yeah, he's definitely one of those options that kind of just gets faded in general in your drafts. He's not the most exciting option. I've always been someone that's just really high on Trevor as a quarterback. I think he's just really good. I think he's right below that tier of, the Herbert, the Jordan Loves, the Drake Mays. I think Drake May might just be Trevor Lawrence coming into the league because he is kind of sporadic and likes to play that hero ball, but he's got a great arm. He can zip it really. So I do like Trevor, and I think people forget that injury. Like people were thinking he wasn't going to be able to finish the season last year, and he didn't even miss a game because of that ankle injury or whatever it was. So he played injured, and he definitely played pretty bad at the end of the season. But I will definitely be willing to give him a second chance. I am really high on Brian Thomas. I think that could be a really fun duo, and he could really, you know, I think the upside's a lot higher than Calvin Ridley at least. But anything else you want to say on Trevor before we move on?
You know, and maybe it's maybe I'm wrong for this, but my expectations of Trevor Lawrence were he's the next Peyton Manning type quarterback coming into the NFL. So, we're in kind of a league where it's like we need to see results and immediate results now. We just need that instant gratification. And so it's been hard for me for Trevor Lawrence, to be honest with you. It's been hard to get there, and I just have not seen it. But the upside is all there. So yes, Trevor Lawrence is worth a flyer on in fantasy, of course, because I mean, it's kind of crazy. I feel like he has an incredibly high ceiling of like top five, and he also has an incredibly low floor. So he's it's hard to judge where he's at because the ceiling could be with the elite alien tier quarterbacks, but also the floor is like for fantasy production wise is like Daniel Jones.
Yeah, and he did finish as a QB 13 last year, had a lot of touchdowns, dropped a lot of missed opportunities, dropped. He's a pretty good rusher of the football. I expect around 4 rushing touchdowns for him. He's crafty. So I do think, he finished as a QB 13. He had a pretty bad season. Everyone would say, he played injured and he's going around, ADP QB 16 to 18. I think it's worth a shot. So with that, let's move on to our QB 18. We had him just barely ahead of Trevor Lawrence, but that is Matthew Stafford. I absolutely love him. One of the most underrated quarterback performances of, the entire NFL last season, but he comes in at my QB 19, Stores is QB 20, and he's the ADP QB 20 right now consensusly. I absolutely love him. You're kind of just betting on the teammates around him to, kind of like a Brock Purdy light. You're betting on Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, Kyron to get a lot of receiving touchdowns and boost Stafford's stats. He's going to have a lot of spike weeks because those Rams will have a lot of weeks where they're really booming on offense. So, I think it's a good ranking for him right by Trevor, a little bit better weapons. So he might have a little bit more points. He finishes the QB 16 last year. Expect him to have pretty much the same exact season as he did last year, honestly, and it was pretty electric. So I think this is a good steady spot for Matt. And yeah, I think it's a good steady option.
100%. Matthew Stafford is kind of just like that Kirk Cousins tier, honestly, for me. It's just like if you miss out on the elite type level of quarterbacks in your fantasy draft, then you're waiting till, the last 30 rounds and you're drafting a Matthew Stafford or a Kirk Cousins because you're going to get those consistent points. They got good receivers. They can score 2, 3 touchdowns every single week passing. Obviously, the running is a concern because they're slower guys. They're not going to run for much. They're not going to get you any fantasy production there. But if you want a steady Puka Nakua, Cooper Cup touchdown every week, then you get Matthew Stafford. He's not going to take over your games like Patrick Mahomes and score 4 touchdowns and run for one and throw for 500 yards. But, he's going to be around that 180 to 240 passing yards and 2 touchdowns every single week. And so you just get that level of consistency out of these older guys who, they're in the twilight their career, and you just know exactly what you're getting out of them. So it's just their floor and their ceiling is just right here. It's just steady all year long. But Matthew Stafford, I really do like it because the chemistry with Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, and I feel like honestly they got good run. I mean Blake Corum, I feel like he'll be kind of like used almost like an Austin Eckler type. I feel like they'll use them a lot in the passing game. Same with Kyron Williams. So I like the upside of Matthew Stafford. I think he'll score plenty of touchdowns this year.
And keep stacks in mind. If you find yourself with Puka Nacua, round two, and you don't have a quarterback in the first, 10 rounds, and you wanted to fade quarterback and just stack up your team and get that Puka and Stafford stack, that could be a smart, draft strategy. So definitely keep that in mind. Keep stacks in mind with all these rankings. Keep in mind we are talking about 6 point touchdown league formats, by the way, just because, I think it makes the quarterbacks that have the better weapons shine. The more touchdowns, the better, and it kind of shine that makes the better quarterback shine. So yeah, Stafford would definitely be benefited by that format. He's going to be throwing a lot of touchdowns. I project him at like 23 to 26. He had 24 last year, so expect pretty much the same exact season from Stafford. Anything else you want to say on him?
Matthew Stafford ran for 65 yards last year, 9 yards the previous year. He did score a rushing touchdown in 2022, but
Oof.
previous to 2022, he hadn't scored a rushing touchdown since 2016.
All right, hot take of the episode. He's going to have 66 rushing yards and 1 touchdown, his career best at both.
Yeah, I love it. You gotta love it, man. You gotta love him. It's freaking Matthew Stafford. He's like a grandpa in the NFL, man. You love the grandpa quarterbacks. They're fun, man.
Like grandpa in the NFL. You love to see it with Matthew Stafford. But let's move on to the complete opposite with our QB 17, Jayden Daniels, very polarizing rookie quarterback, second overall pick. He comes into my QB 17. He's the ADP consensus QB 18, and Stores has him at QB 23. He's hating on the rookies. He's a ageist. He's like a Vic Fangio over there as a fantasy manager. He has to see it first. He wants him to prove it to him. So I respect it, but I'll talk about Jayden first then, since I'm so much higher on him. You know, we both talked about it a lot this whole draft process. We both weren't really high on him as a passer. I think he might be the worst. I think he is definitely the worst passer in the NFL day one as a starter, but the rushing upside really, really boosts him. As long as he's starting in the NFL with the rushing ability that he has and the upside he has, he's probably going to finish top 5 in rushing among quarterbacks. It's going to make him a really valuable fantasy option, really, regardless, even if it's for trade value, if he's your QB2 and you can get him. If you can get a Stafford and Jayden Daniels both, that's a pretty fun quarterback room. So I do think he's going to be valuable in fantasy. I think the rushing will really help him. He has good weapons: Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Luke McCaffrey, Brian Robinson, Eckler. He throws a pretty ball. He really does. He has a nice touch on his deep balls. He throws really nice balls. He'll get the ball out in time. It's really just the upside in question with him. So I don't mind him, man. I really don't. I think he's going to be a good fantasy option. And, everyone has the hype around the rookie quarterbacks, especially him. He's got all the hype. He's really fun to watch. And yeah, it will be interesting. It is hard to rank these guys because we've been talking about them all offseason. We have all the hype with all these rookies. So it's hard to, calm down on the rookie hype and kind of get the middle ground. But how are you feeling about Daniels?
You know what? Maybe, I'm progressively, I probably end up will getting higher on Jayden Daniels throughout this process, but I feel like it's going to take some time, especially to progress through the passing. But yeah, I mean, right now, I feel like, what you're going to get out of Jayden Daniels on Sundays is, 160 yards passing, passing touchdown if you're lucky, but you might see that 70 to, 80 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. I feel like that's where you're really banking on production, which also scares me because, he took a lot of big hits in college. And the NFL is a much more aggressive game. And, the pass rush is getting at you faster and you're under more duress. And, your body has to last, 17 games. And so for that aspect, I'm taking in health, I'm taking in size with all these rankings, to be honest with you. He's a slender frame guy. He's known to take big hits. He hasn't learned how to slide very well. And so for those reasons, it scares me, and I want to stay a little bit more away from Jayden Daniels. But I also understand the polarizing athleticism, where he is lightning fast, and if he gets around those corners, he can break free for big yards. And he goes into a Cliff Kingsbury offense where it's probably going to be catered to him, and a lot of short passing, quick, intermediate, fast game to where he could really take advantage of that. So, I don't hate Jayden Daniels. I do worry about him holding up for a full 17 game season, and I worry about him, getting in there. And it took him a while in college, to become comfortable and to get to that Heisman. I mean, he did grow over time and became a very good quarterback in college, in the right system. So and like you said, I got that Vic Fangio. I need to see it first to believe it. So, I got to see it connect at the NFL level first before, I'm going to be super high on Jayden Daniels. But, I get these guys who are in, these underdog sweaty, fantasy leagues where, you have to take flyers, and Jayden Daniels is worth the flyer because there is tremendous upside, but there's also, that floor that really scares me.
Yeah, it speaks volumes as two people that were low on him as passers coming into the draft. We have him one spot above ADP. We're saying to draft and take that shot on the flyer just because of that rushing. He could have spike weeks where he has, 150 rush yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. He really is that type of athlete. He had those type of performances in the SEC last year. So really polarizing, one of the more polarizing discussions we will have. But with that, let's move on to one of the more least polarizing quarterbacks, just a really high floor, seamless transition. Kirk Cousins is going over to Atlanta, and it feels like a seamless transition. Feels like it's the exact same situation over there in Minnesota. He averaged 20.1 points last year in Minnesota with that great situation. He comes in as our QB 16. He's my QB 16. He stores his QB 15, and he's the ADP consensus QB 17. So we're one spot higher on him. I'll let you talk about him since you're highest.
Kirk Cousins is my dog, man. He was like, gosh, was it 3 or 4 weeks into the season? He was like quarterback one.
Yep.
Um, and obviously, his season was derailed by injury last year. But, Kirko, man, he is a dog. He goes out there, and this is always, you we have a podcast now. I got to give out my fantasy secrets. But, if I didn't get one of my top guys in the first, 5 rounds, I'm waiting till round 12, 13, 14, whatever it is, the back end of the draft. And I'm taking Kirk Cousins, and I'm taking that flyer on Kirk Cousins every single time because he is the level of consistency. If you want to talk about a quarterback where I can fall asleep on a Sunday and not have to worry about Kirk Cousins not throwing 2 touchdowns, he's always going to, it's 2 touchdowns. It's 2 touchdowns every single week for this guy. And, he gets it done, and he goes into another good situation in Atlanta where he's got Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, Darnell Mooney. He's got a good receiving core, right? He's got a good offense that it can hold up, and he can really, thrive. And he's got, just Drake London, I feel like is just going to be an absolute dog and a red zone threat. And, come wide receiver episodes, I'm going to be very happy and high and excited for him with Kirk Cousins because he finally gets a good quarterback. And he's still so young. Sorry, different tangent. But yeah, I mean, Kirk Cousins is my absolute dog to go to in the later rounds if you miss out on one of those elite alien tier level prospects because he gets it done every year, man. I mean, it seems like almost every single year he's throwing, I'll go over his stats, so since 2020, 35 touchdowns, 2021, 33 touchdowns, 2022, 29 touchdowns. Obviously last year injury, 18 touchdowns, but he would have been on pace for 30 plus touchdowns last year. So,
So what are you projecting this year?
I think he's gonna get 30.
Yeah.
I think he's gonna throw 30 touchdowns. I'm fairly confident that he's gonna throw 30 touchdowns.
I would say 29, 30. Yeah, but it feels just like he's on the Vikings in the East Coast. It really does. He has that same
Easy
core
division
weapon.
too.
Yep.
You
Yep.
play the Panthers twice a year. You play the Saints twice a year. I feel like it's a division where you can really take advantage, of the maybe weaker secondaries and weaker teams. So, I think he goes to the perfect situation.
Kevin O'Connell was perfect for him, that Rams background. Now he has Zach Robinson with that Rams background. So it really is pretty similar. It will be a comfortable situation for him, other than the fact that Michael Penix is behind him, I guess. But the weapons are awesome. He has Bijan as a security blanket as well to pad some stats, and throwing some screens to him will take some to the house, and that'll really pad some stats. So yeah, like you said, it is a good draft strategy. If you miss out on Josh Allen or someone, definitely don't panic. There's so many good quarterbacks, especially if you're in a one quarterback league. Do not panic. You have Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff, we'll talk about, Tua, Herbert. A lot of these quarterbacks are falling way below really where they should be going because there's so many good ones. So anything else you want to say on Kirk and this great situation?
Just, for those in our fantasy league, I hope they don't watch these videos.
Just get our whole quarterback strategies. Let's be real. Everyone in our league is just going to be overdrafting quarterbacks. So we will end up with these
Yeah.
Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff types for sure.
Oh, 100% happens every year. Yeah. So Kirk Cousins is always my dog. He's always my go-to. So, a lot of love to Kirk Cousins. He's been on the fantasy team a lot.
Absolutely. And with that, let's move on to our QB 15, a very polarizing one as well. It's Tua Tagovailoa for the Miami Dolphins. He comes in as my QB 14, stores as QB 16. He's the consensus ADP QB 14, and he comes in as our QB 15. Very polarizing. Like I said, he led the league in passing yards last year. I feel like I have to start out with that. You kind of get a floor just because of this offense, because of the weapons on the team, because of Mike McDaniel's play calling. You really do get a floor. Neither of us are really high on Tua as the quarterback. Neither of us think the Dolphins should pay him. But at the same time, this is fantasy football. The situation is just so great. He had 29 touchdowns last year. And I think it can be argued that he kind of had it bad. He had a bad beat with touchdowns last year because there were so many rushing touchdowns that were kind of vultured. I feel like he'll actually have upwards of 30 touchdowns this year. He might have less passing yards. Definitely will have less than 4,600 passing yards. But yeah, I think it's just a nice floor to have in fantasy, especially if you find yourself with Tyreek Hill round one, you find yourself with Jaylen Waddle, you definitely want to fade quarterback and then just get that Tua stack because, Tua's not the prettiest option. He's a little bit more boring. He's going to get faded. He's probably going to fall, maybe even past the ADP of 14. So I think it is a good value where he's going. It's obviously a great value considering his stats last year and just the situation around him. I think it's worth the pick for sure.
Oh, 100%. He's got one of the, more creative, forward thinking, offensive minds in football. So, and he's got the best receiving core and the fastest receiving core we've almost ever seen. You got Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle. I mean, the amount of separation that he gets to throw to is unlike any other quarterback. So, Tua is a very system quarterback. He's a very timely quarterback, and he is very good at being on time. On those go routes, on those slants, he is very. If I'm talking good about Tua, he is very on time. He gets the ball and he has got a pretty quick release. But if we're going into the negatives with Tua, it does worry me a little bit about him this year that he may get figured out. I mean, he has gotten better every single year, from a fantasy aspect for football. I mean, obviously injuries are definitely a concern with Tua and concussions are definitely a concern with Tua. But I mean, he goes from 3,500 passing yards in 2022 to 4,600. He goes from 25 touchdowns to 29 touchdowns. He does shoot up a little bit in interceptions from the 2 year, almost doubling 8 to 14 interceptions. And then obviously the rushing with Tua is pretty capped. He only ran for 74 yards and no touchdowns last year, which is kind of disappointing. You'd like to see a couple rushing touchdowns in there. But, just because of this offense, Tua is going to be productive. He's going to throw. He's going to have those outlandish big boom weeks where he throws 350 yards and 4 touchdowns because he's got the receivers that can do that. He can throw 4 slants for 190 yards to Tyreek Hill and 2 touchdowns. It's just how electric that offense is. And I mean, you throw a screen pass to Devon Achane or Raheem Mostert, and those guys take it to the house for 90 yards. It's just that's the kind of offense. They got a big boom or bust offense, and he'll have those boom weeks, which are very valuable for fantasy. And if you do get Tyreek Hill, it is kind of a fun stack because you'll get, a handful of those boom weeks that'll just win you games between the two.
Yeah, it's almost an essential stack if you get Tyreek Hill. And that is where it makes hard to rank Tua because he seems like a stack essential quarterback. He seems like you're only drafting him if you do have Tua and Waddle, for being completely honest. And that's fine. And yeah, he averaged 19.1 last year just because, like you said, he is very inconsistent. He probably had 40 more often than not, but he is very inconsistent. Some of those games are very low. He kind of got figured out at the end of the year last year. The offense really ended out pretty badly, especially in fantasy. It kind of lost people some leagues really with how that Tua was really ending the season in fantasy. So yeah, that is something to keep in mind. We're drafting him technically one spot higher than ADP, but we're not like, overwhelmingly going out and getting him. We're just kind of letting him fall to us, especially if we have that stack. That's kind of how we view Tua. So with that, let's move on to a more positive discussion, just because I think Jared Goff, man, is gonna be an absolute stud. He last year he was an absolute stud. He's kind of just like that same breath as Tua. You're relying on the weapons and the Ben Johnson to scheme up a really good offense, and he's gonna have, like you said, 2 touchdowns probably each week. It's kind of in that Kirk Cousins mold, that Kirk Cousins tier of quarterback. So we'll talk about Jared Goff, my QB 13. He stores his QB 10. He's the ADP consensus QB 13, comes in as our QB 14, but I'll let you talk about this guy. You got him at the top 10.
Oh, dude, he's just Jared Goff is awesome, man. It's so funny because he's never looked at as a very high-end quarterback or a very electric quarterback. But I mean, ever since he's been paired up with Ben Johnson in this Lions offense, it's really clicked with him, and you start to see why he was a first overall pick. But I mean, the system is perfect. He's got Amon-Ra St. Brown. They add Sam Laporta last year, which was just so perfect. The balance between the run and the pass is so good. It sets up play action, which Jared Goff just ultimately thrives so good in. I mean, but I mean, the dude was awesome. He threw for 4,500 yards last year and 30 touchdowns. The year before, he threw for 4,400 yards and another 29 touchdowns. So he's just been the mold of consistency. And they're pretty much running it back this year. I mean, I would have liked to have seen the Lions really step up and get a maybe a little bit more high-end wide receiver too to pair behind Amon-Ra St. Brown. But I don't really feel like the offense needs it. I feel like just the way the system is set up, it just really thrives for any receiver to really be good in it. And so maybe Jamison Williams or, Khalif Raymond, he's still on the team. Did he leave?
Wide receiver 3, baby.
Okay. So you got those two, and it just works. But I mean, obviously you got Sam Laporta, who is probably the best tight end in football this year. And then your two running backs are fantastic, and Jahmyr Gibbs in the passing game is just super electric and super fun. He can be used as another receiver. But I just kind of want to tell a funny story about 2 years ago in fantasy, Dan. I don't know if you remember it, but it was the funniest thing with COVID. Some COVID games were happening. There were some injuries plaguing. And it was kind of funny because me and you were just using Jared Goff as like a waiver wire like pickup, and we were winning games because of it. And it was so funny. It was weird because none of us would keep him on the team for like more than 1 or 2 weeks. But we'd like pick him up, he'd score 30 points, and then we'd drop him the next week, and then you'd pick him up. It was just like this weird anomaly that was happening. But it's kind of when I was like, well, what's going on? Jared Goff is like QB 9. Why do we keep picking him up and dropping him? But it was so funny. And then you ended up keeping him on your roster for the rest of the year. And I think it benefited you a lot. But it was funny because he won me like 3 weeks of football, and I dropped him, and I was so pissed after. And I think you ended up picking him up, and he ended up winning you like 6 weeks consistently of football and like making you like a last second playoff push. But sorry, just a random tangent if you remember that. I thought it was hilarious.
No, I definitely do remember that. We were trading him back and forth. He helped us both make the playoffs. We literally wouldn't have made the playoffs without him, both of us. So it is pretty hilarious. And then last year, we weren't really even able to get him because he was that QB 7. He was absolutely beautiful throwing all those touchdowns. I expect him to be the exact same. He had 30 touchdowns last year. Probably will get 27 to 30 this year. I don't see why he shouldn't. I think Laporta and Amon-Ra will be just as good. Ben Johnson's going to be there with that last hurrah, really one last ride, one last dance for this Lions team to really go all in. So we're all in on the Lions. I think if you don't get your guy at quarterback, Jared Goff's just the ultimate guy. Because like you said, that he wins you games. He's going to get you at least 20. He really is. He has spike weeks with this offense. He will win you games. So I absolutely love it. There is also something to like everyone knows Jared Goff just plays great in domes. And sometimes if he's outside and in negative conditions, it's not the best for Jared Goff. I don't have the exact stat pulled up with me right now, but I think he starts like his first 8 games of this season are all in domes. He has 13 of his 17 games or whatever are all in domes. Like he just has a crazy favorable schedule for his play style as well. So I think Jared Goff just has a great season. He'll finish as a top 10 fantasy quarterback, I think, as well. So I like us having him here. And it might seem low, but we're really high on a few other guys.
I absolutely love Jared Goff, man. Just a slept on guy. So yeah, again, like you said, fantasy football, you don't need to panic, man. There's plenty of options. You do not need to overdraft. You don't need to spend, and we're talking, this obviously in dynasty it's different, but in one quarterback leagues, there's no need to panic and overdraft quarterbacks because of guys like Jared Goff.
Absolutely. And another guy that's really just the same copy and paste discussion. It will be Brock Purdy, our QB 13. He comes in at my QB 12, stores his QB 14, and he's the consensus ADP QB 11. Absolutely love him. And it really is that same conversation as the Jared Goff. You're betting on the talent around him, the weapons, and scoring those touchdowns. And it's kind of just a one up version of Jared Goff, a little bit more of a suit up offense. This Niners offense, everyone knows the talent they have. Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey, Debo, Kittle. You bring in first round receiver Ricky Pearsall. It's just kind of ridiculous. Purdy's going to have a crazy season again. He had 31 touchdowns last year. Was an MVP discussions just because of how good those weapons were. He's just a great point guard for those weapons. So I expect right around 30 touchdowns as well, and that's really valuable in fantasy. He's going to get you that 20 points a week. He averaged 20.7 last year, which is just incredible. He was kind of a league winner as well at the end of the year. He really just boomed. Him and Debo were special together. So I think great option as well. Just like we said with Goff, if you don't get your guy, wait for Purdy or Goff. Whoever falls to you, one of these guys is going to fall probably farther than they should be. I could see, Purdy going as QB 14 in some drafts. Could see Goff going to like the last round in some drafts just because their names. So I think it's great value. I think you bet on the weapons and like, for example, spoiler alert, I have Purdy, Goff, Tua, these guys above Herbert just because of the weapons, and I'm just betting on the touchdowns really just because you're getting 30 touchdowns. I'll take that, man. So I love Purdy.
Yeah, so Brock Purdy it may seem like I don't know. I am a little bit lower than consensus. It's a gut intuition that I feel like there is going to be a little bit of a regression. I feel like he might be a little bit overdrafted because of how awesome he was last year, but I just kind of feel a little bit of regression from the 49ers. I don't know how long they can consistently be so good and at the top and all their, last year was kind of an anomaly for the most part. Christian McCaffrey stayed healthy most games. George Kittle stayed healthy. I mean, Debo was kind of a little bit more in and out of the lineup, but Brandon Ayuk was healthy all year. And so I'm a little worried about that. I feel like there's some regression and just I hate to put that in the world, but I'll knock on some hardwood as I do it. But like I feel like an injury is gonna happen. I feel like bad vibes from the 49ers, even though I shouldn't because they're one of the most electric, good football teams. I just feel like there's something's gonna happen there. But I mean, Brock Purdy, really, him and Dak Prescott's hilarious. They were both like the two MVP candidates for like most of like 15 weeks. They were just consistent, fantastic. I mean, Brock Purdy has the most electric core around him, obviously, with a top five tight end, incredible wide receivers, the best running back in football. Trent Williams protecting your blind side. It couldn't get any better for him. Kyle Shanahan as your play caller. So yeah, I mean, you kind of do lock Brock Purdy in as that, consistent 2 touchdown a week guy just because he's in such a good system where it's just hard for him to fail.
Yeah, 100%. Like he had almost 4,300 yards last year. I expect around 4,000 again, expect around 30 touchdowns. So I do just love the shot, taking the shot at the offense. All these Niners options are going really high in fantasy. I think it's kind of crazy that the quarterback isn't going really high. Same with the Lions weapons. So I am very high on Purdy and Goff, just really good point guards, very good options for your fantasy team. A lot of touchdowns will be injected into your lineups. But with that, let's go into our QB 12, not 11 yet. Our QB 12 is Kyler Murray. No peeking. QB 12 is Kyler Murray. He's my QB 10. He's the ADP consensus QB 10. He stores his QB 12 and he comes in as our QB 12, just right behind ADP on Kyler. But I absolutely love him. I love bringing in Marvin Harrison Jr., arguably the best receiver he's ever played with, right there with DeAndre Hopkins, I guess. Could argue either way, but Marvin's going to be electric. The connection's going to be electric. I have no doubt the offense will be really helped by Marvin's just presence in general. I think that connection is just going to be really awesome. The back shoulder fades, the high IQ from both Marvin and Kyler, they're just really going to complement each other well. So, I love Kyler. I love the rushing upside. I don't think it's like Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts rushing upside. It's a little bit different because of his size. He has, limited upside with the rushing, but he's going to get those flashy runs. He's going to get some James Conner 1 yard touchdown. So I like Kyler. I think he's a top 10 quarterback in fantasy. Just really high floor. He played solid last year, and he's getting Marvin Harrison. So
Yeah, I mean, I never have understood the Kyler Murray slander. I mean, Kyler Murray, in my opinion, from not a fantasy aspect, is definitely a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. He's very electric with his feet. I think he's an incredible passer. That can't be understated enough. He's very accurate. He has a very beautiful deep ball. He gets that. Trey McBride was his best wide receiver last year. He gets him back this year. You add Marvin Harrison Jr., you get in a fun, exciting running back to pair to that offense with Trey Benson, who I think can help take the load off a little bit. But Kyler Murray, man, he's going to be fun. He's going to be special. He has, easily top 10 upside, because he can be that running back, quarterback, running back duo. I mean, I'll go over some of his rushing stats from previous years, but I mean, his first 2 years, he was absolutely electric, man. In 2019, he ran for 544 yards and 4 touchdowns. In 2020, he ran for 819 yards and 11 touchdowns. And so if you're getting that 2020 Kyler, man, it's gonna be special. I mean, and that year he also threw for 3,900 yards and 26 touchdowns. So if you're getting 2020 Kyler Murray, it's incredible. But I mean, he's been a little bit plagued with injuries. He's been memed about Call of Duty. He can't win after a new Call of Duty is released. So I don't know if a new Call of Duty is in the makings right now. I hope not. I don't want to hear that again. But if you're getting that 2020 Kyler Murray, which I think he will go back into his best. I think he'll have one of his best seasons this year. I honestly, I think he's worth. I think he's worth the a mid-round flyer pick on, because I think you can honestly get 500 rushing yards out of Kyler Murray, and I think he will. James Conner's getting a little older, a little slower. I think he'll go back to stealing a little bit more touchdowns, and he's just got a way better receiving core and a way better team around him.
yeah, I always just go back to that Eagles game, this game that's in the picture right here. He finished with 230 yards, 3 touchdowns, 30 fantasy points. It was really optimistic at the end of the year. The Cardinals were kind of gaining steam once he got back from injury. And I feel like he's just going to keep that momentum going. He has a full offseason. He doesn't have to focus on rehabbing an injury. He has a full offseason just to prepare on football and practice with Marvin and gain the chemistry. So I agree. I think Kyler's going to have a great season. I think he's going to pick up right where he left off last season and really just be awesome. I think he's gonna be an awesome option. It sucks that we're a little bit lower on ADP, but we're just high on some other guys. So absolutely love Kyler, someone that we're both definitely going to be drafting. He's someone that's fun to have. If you have Trey McBride, Marvin Harrison, definitely target Kyler because he's going to be electric.
100%. Yeah, super fun quarterback, and the rushing upside is just very tempting with him.
All right. And with that, let's go on to the last quarterback we're going to talk about today, Justin Herbert, who comes in as our QB 11. Very polarizing discussion here. He's my QB 15. He stores his QB 6. He's a consensus ADP QB 12. What are we doing with Herbert? I don't know what to do. We're all over the place with him. He's literally we're opposite sides of the spectrum on him. He's ADP is right in the middle. It's really hard to rank Herbert, man.
Let's just sit down, take a breather. I'm gonna walk you guys through Justin Herbert, and I'm by the end of my spiel right here. I'm gonna have Danny have him in his top 10 because it's just disrespectful at this point to me, man. Justin Herbert, it's kind of this toxic environment around him. It's like either you love him or you hate him. There's like two sides of people that think he's terrible, or people that think he's a top four quarterback in the NFL. And so it's kind of hard to find that in between ground on him. I know you're not, you're obviously, you're a big Justin Herbert fan and you're just looking at it from a fantasy aspect, but I'm also looking at this from a fantasy aspect. And, let me just read you off Justin Herbert's first few years in the NFL. Obviously, totally different schemes, obviously, totally different systems. Justin Herbert has almost had a new offensive coordinator every single year he's been in the NFL. He's had no consistency at coaching. He's had no back-to-back seasons. I mean, Brandon Staley was his only back-to-back seasons with the coach, and that only lasted 2 years. So let's just go on to this. So 2020, obviously Justin Herbert's his rookie season. He comes in week 2 after a hurt Tyrod Taylor gets his lungs punctured by the team doctor, but he goes on to break almost every single record, 4,300 passing yards, 31 touchdowns, and he goes along with 234 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns. So Justin Herbert is actually a sneakily good athlete. He can actually run some touchdowns. He's a big, fast guy. He can get you fantasy points from that aspect. 2021, he has his best season, 5,000 passing yards, 38 touchdowns to go along with 300 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. And then you see a little bit of a regression. The last 2 years, Justin Herbert has been hurt. He had in 2022, he had that finger injury. He had bruised ribs almost the entire season, but he still goes on to throw for 4,700 yards, 25 touchdowns. And then his rushing, he was hurt, and that's where you see his rushing start to decline because he couldn't run much that year because with the, broken rib cartilages. I think he broke like one side of the entire rib cartilage. So there wasn't much rushing there. 2023 is his worst season. Obviously, he gets hurt in that Denver game. The season was a disaster. Mike Williams leaves week 3. So there's just never, I mean, and maybe I sound like, a dying horse here going in circles, but it's just there's never been consistency. People, oh, Justin Herbert played with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Whenever were those two healthy? And so this year, I feel like this is the start of something great for Justin Herbert. He gets Jim Harbaugh, a proven winning coach. Justin Herbert's never had a good running game around him. Yeah, Austin Eckler was a fantasy god. He just poached touchdowns. He was never a good runner. He never was able to keep the offense on the field to sustain drives for Justin Herbert. It's always 2nd and 9 and 3rd and 11 that the Chargers were in, trying to get first downs to make a drive keep going. So, I mean, obviously he had to throw a lot, but Justin Herbert's best football, I feel like, is going to be play action. It's going to be coming off the run. It's going to be having these guys like DJ Chark and Brendan Rice and wide receivers, Lad McConkey, who can run a 4.3, who can get down the field. I feel like people are overthinking this, and I feel like this might be his most productive, best season. I don't feel like his touchdowns are really going to go. Yes, they might be a more heavy run team, but that's just going to be more consistency. The offense is going to sustain longer drives. They're going to be able to be on the field longer. I feel like they're going to score more touchdowns. I feel like he'll score a lot of red zone touchdowns. But I mean, from the other side, I do get it, Dan, and I'll let you kind of explain your spiel, but it's kind of my understanding of Justin Herbert. I feel like he's going to be consistent. I feel like he's going to throw for a lot of yards off of play actions. I feel like he's going to be in the red zone a whole lot more, and I feel like he's going to stay healthy. And sorry to keep going, I keep spieling, but I feel like they'll have maybe that more where he'll be actually able to use his legs and actually score some running touchdowns, which excites me a lot from a fantasy aspect.
Yeah, so the Herbert conversation very polarizing. A lot of things to talk about. First of all, if you were to rank all the quarterbacks off of raw talent, then obviously he's right up there in that top 5 conversation as he is for everyone, and that's just kind of consensus. But yeah, this is a fantasy discussion, and I will go into my number 15 ranking why I have him behind, like I said, Tua, Purdy, Goff, because in my opinion, this is fantasy. I think when you look at the moves that the Chargers made, they're really just going for that Lions format, and I think that's awesome. I think that's going to be perfect for Herbert. They have the perfect offensive line. They're going to have a really solid run game that'll help him get to the red zone more. He's going to have more touchdowns. He had 20 last year, obviously had some games injured. I expect him to get around 25, 26 touchdowns, maybe 27 as a ceiling. That's why I have him below those other quarterbacks, because I expect a Goff to get 30 touchdowns and closer to 4,000 yards. I expect Herbert to get around 3,500. He could definitely get more, but it will be interesting just to see how that, the early downs are called, I guess. But I am happy that we're high on Herbert compared to consensus, because we are pointing out the fact that it is being overstated that the Chargers are going to have a run heavy offense, a run first offense, whatever it is. They have Justin Herbert. At the end of the day, if it's 3rd down, they're not going to just run the ball just because of their mentality. They have Justin Herbert. So they have a nice flexibility. They can adapt the scheme. It's not going to be a full Greg Roman Ravens scheme. So I do like that we're higher on him, to point out the fact that he is going to outperform his ADP. He is going to be better than people think. So I do like that. My literal reasoning is just that I think, the guys that I said, Tua, Purdy, with Goff, I just think they're going to have more yards and touchdowns at the end of the day. And just I'm betting on weapons, and I just think those 3 teams have better weapons that are going to score more touchdowns at the end of the day. And that's just where the scoring comes in for me.
Yeah, and I think it's a valid argument. I totally understand that. I am, with the Greg Roman, I really hope, from a fantasy aspect and from, just I hope we get to see Justin Herbert run more, man. I feel like he is such an incredible athlete. He's sneakily fast for being 6'6", and I would like for them to use some of that RPO that they did and, Shane Steichen did in his rookie season. I mean, he really thrived in that kind of stuff. So I hope it opens up the playbook to more of what he did in his rookie season and they find a balance of that running game for his sake. And I feel like, it's kind of hard because, me and you are, it's like his ceiling could be this year top five, but his floor could also be, that 15 range that you have him in. So, I totally get it. I totally understand because, I mean, the Chargers may run the ball 25, 30 times, and Gus Edwards may be that guy on the 1 yard line. So it's just, we don't know. It's foreign for us, and it'll just be, to be determined. But in my personal opinion, I think he is worth that dart throw because I think it could be, one of his better seasons from just a touchdown and, efficiency type thing. I feel like, you don't have to just rely on him throwing 40 times a game and getting hurt every single week. I feel like he can throw 24 times a game and throw 2 touchdowns and have, 50 rushing yards. I feel like he has that type of, season that Greg Roman and him could put together. But, that's the optimist in me coming out.
Yeah, and another reason I do have him behind the guys that I named is I really just I don't know how high the upside is compared to those teams because when you look at the path to success, it will be that Lions path where you're getting those 30 touchdowns from Goff because of Laporta and Gibbs and Amon-Ra. They're going to just inject those touchdowns just because of how talented those players are. And when you look at the Chargers, he's going to be in the red zone. He's going to, their offensive scheme will draw up a lot of touchdowns. He's going to, get 25-ish touchdowns. I just don't know if the upside is much when you don't have that Laporta type tight end, you don't have that Amon-Ra type impact, and maybe Lad McConkey can grow into that, but day one is for rookie or for Herbert's 2024 season at least. I don't see that weapon, that one guy that will really boost the upside and touchdown volume really.
No, you're right. There really is no elite wide receiver or tight end prospect really on the Chargers right now. Yeah, you're banking on, you've seen Josh Palmer. You're hoping Quentin Johnston can take a step up, and you're hoping Lad McConkey can just kind of be that, Keenan Allen yak type guy. But there is no Jamar Chase or Tyreek Hill or Justin Jefferson on that team, and no Sam Laporta. So again, that is another valid argument. You're capped with, how good your receivers can be because you don't really have that guy like a Jamar Chase that can take a slant 80 yards at the house or Tyreek Hill that can just get 5 yards of separation on a route. So, Herbert does have to, kind of carry his wide receivers. He has to, uplift them to where they're not gonna, really probably take over any game. It's gonna have to be Justin Herbert taking over the game.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the only reason, honestly, the only reason I have the quarterbacks I do above him just because of the weapons. Like I have Kyler one spot above him just because of Marvin Harrison. Honestly, that's kind of what it comes down to. They're really close. They're all kind of tiered up. And Herbert did play a decent amount of games last year with no Keenan, no Mike Williams. Like you said, he averaged 19.7 points, not shabby at all. So, you can still expect Herbert to get around 20 points each week with this offense. So, yeah, like you said, I like obviously, by the way, with his ADP, like I think he was being drafted as the QB 15 a week ago. Take him with his ADP. That's kind of the point of this discussion, I guess, really is Herbert is being underdrafted. We have him higher than consensus. It's Justin Herbert at the end of the day when he's kind of tiered up with a few of these other quarterbacks, especially if he starts falling to around the QB 15, you definitely do want to snag him there. So, yeah, there is upside just in the name himself. It's Justin Herbert. He's a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. There's upside that he will have weeks where he just wills his way to touchdowns for sure.
100%. And I think that was our quarterbacks 20 through 11. It has become dark in my room, and I'm just kind of noticing. I was too lazy to get up and turn on the light, but we started when it was light and we end when it's dark, baby. That's the kind of effort we're putting into these pods.
I think it looks cool like that. So maybe we should just start our podcast at this time because it looks kind of cool, right? That lighting looks kind of nice. I'm not gonna lie. But any honorable mentions you want to talk about? I will say our combined rankings, our QB 21 ended up being Aaron Rodgers, who's going as the QB 19. Our 22 ended up being Will Levis, who you're really high on. He's going as a 23. We had Bryce Young at quarterback 23, who you're also really high on. Baker at 24 and Geno at 25. Anyone else you want to talk about?
I would like to just, I got a name that you just said, Bryce Young. Somebody who I'm really excited for, obviously with consensus and stuff, he's probably not going to be, he might not even be drafted in your leagues, but I think he is worth a dart throw in the one quarterback leagues if you want to roster a quarterback on your bench because I mean, Bryce Young was in a terrible, terrible situation this year. They sure up the offensive line. Um, they go out and they get Xavier Legette. They bring in Deontay Johnson. They bring in Jatavion Sanders and Jonathan Brooks in the draft. So I mean, it's just a completely revamped offense. And so I'm looking for Bryce Young to really take a big step moving forward.
Absolutely. I love it. We always end our exit hot takes with the Panthers, so we'll end it with another one. Bryce Young. He's being
At
drafted
the
as a
end.
QB. Yeah, Bryce Young's being drafted as a QB 31. Stores has him as like QB 17. So Stores is very high in Bryce Young. He's the poster boy for Bryce Young this offseason. So yeah, I kind of agree. I think this Panthers offense will be one to target in fantasy just because the value, Jonathan Brooks, Leggett, all these guys are very great values. So yeah, with that, anything else you want to say?
Bryce Young has Joe Burrow upside. Let's end it on that, baby. Let's end it on that.
Well, all right. Hopefully he gets his Jamar Chase in there for Carolina. But with that, thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned for our next episode, for our next fantasy rankings. We'll be doing each position. We got to get our top 10 quarterbacks as well. So stay tuned to the NFL Seekers podcast. Like, comment, subscribe for the algorithm. Peace out.
Peace.